Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Caregiver Support Initiative's virtual caregiver conference on the importance of early diagnosis and planning for the future. I'm Megan Davis, Director of Health and Wellness at Baker Public Relations. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. So before we dive in, we're just going to go through some housekeeping items and review the schedule of today's events. Please note that this conference will be recorded and posted to the Caregiver Support Initiative website. Throughout the conference, you will all be in a listen-only mode. We will begin the conference with a panel discussion in just a few moments, featuring experts from Caregiver Support Initiative, the Alzheimer's Association of Northeastern New York, and the Glens Falls Hospital Center of Excellence for Alzheimer's Disease. The primary mission of Caregiver Support Initiative is to reduce caregiver financial, emotional, and physical distress by providing compassionate support at every step of the caregiving journey. Our experts with us today will cover everything from the importance of getting an early diagnosis, what that diagnostic process looks like, and then planning for the short-term and long-term after diagnosis. During the panel discussion and throughout the keynote presentation, we encourage attendees to submit questions by typing them into the chat box. We will be monitoring questions throughout the duration of the conference, and we'll be sure to get those questions in front of our experts before our time is up. After the panel discussion, we will have a short 10-minute intermission before our keynote speaker, Ruth Fish, begins her presentation. So now let's begin the panel discussion by introducing our panelists. As a reminder, please submit your questions in the chat box, and we will address those questions as they come in. So first we have Kristen Osterhout. She is the Regional Coordinator for Education and Training Services for all counties covered within the Caregiver Support Initiative. Kristen provides free specialized education for caregivers of individuals with dementia. She facilitates training in group settings and on a one-on-one basis in the caregiver's home. Kristen is passionate about education, providing caregivers with knowledge and connecting them to resources within their communities. Next, we have Heather Hogan O'Connor. She is the Program Director at the Center of Excellence for Alzheimer's Disease at Glens Falls Hospital. It is one of 10 such centers in the entire state. The mission of the Center of Excellence is to promote early diagnosis, support patients and caregivers, act as a conduit to community resources, and serve as a leader in education. Heather has more than 20 years of experience in healthcare and administration. Prior to that, Heather worked for 8 years in the pharmaceutical industry with a portfolio that includes neuroscience and geriatric therapies. And last, we have Lindsay Stanslawski. She is a certified dementia specialist and the program manager with Alzheimer's Association of Northeastern New York, serving Hamilton, Warren, and Washington counties. Lindsay previously worked as the program director for a memory care assisted living community. Lindsay has been supporting caregivers and those with a diagnosis for the last 10 years. Ladies, thank you all for being here today to offer your expertise and support. So let's get started with our questions. Kristen, we're going to start with you. What support services does Caregiver Initiative provide to Alzheimer's caregivers?
Yes, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Megan. So our initiative has a grant from the New York State Department of Health to provide services for caregivers with anyone with any form of memory loss or dementia. And it could be in the early stages before you even have an official diagnosis. That's okay too. And the services that we provide usually start with an initial consultation between the caregiver and one of our care navigators. The care navigators also provide ongoing support for caregivers. They do ongoing consultations. They'll talk about community resources, different aspects of our program and what we have to offer, and connect them to other agencies as well if they think that would be beneficial for them. We also offer support groups, memory cafes, which are social events. These are really fun ways for caregivers to connect with their loved ones that are living with dementia or Alzheimer's, and also with other people. A lot of times, caregivers will say to me that they feel really isolated. They're nervous about bringing their loved one into public anymore. So this is a really nice, non-judgmental place where you can go and socialize, meet other people, and have fun spending quality time together. As you mentioned in my introduction, we do education. There's a variety of online and in-person educational programs. I have a lot of webinars that I've done over the past year and a half that are recorded on our website. We also have online trainings that you can complete at your own pace, and I'm available to meet over video chat, in person, in your home, in our offices. So wherever is the most convenient place for you, we're really trying to make sure that we meet caregivers where they're at. And then the other two programs I want to mention, the first is respite. So we will actually pay for you to get a little bit of a break from your caregiving. It's not meant to replace full-time caregiving, but it's just a chance for you to get out and get your hair done or go to the mall with a friend. I don't know, go out to lunch. You can use those hours however you want to use them. And Project Lifesaver. Now, this is a really important program that we offer where it's a tracking device that your loved one would wear if they're at risk for wandering, which wandering and elopement is very, very common with dementia. And even the most diligent caregivers have to go to the bathroom sometimes. They have to take a shower and, sleep at night. So it's impossible to watch your loved ones 24/7. This just gives them a little bit of peace of mind. We partner with the sheriff's departments to offer this service. So it's a bracelet that your loved one would wear. And in the event that they were to go missing, you would call the sheriff's department. They would be able to help locate them very quickly. It's a nationwide program. So if you're on vacation, you can call the emergency services wherever you are. And it has a really great success rate. I think it's 100% success at locating a person who utilizes that service. It's not specific to dementia, it's anyone who's at risk for wandering. So kids with autism sometimes will use Project Lifesaver too. It just is a really great program that's out there. And I always like to mention that all of our services are free, they're open to the public, and you can just call us up and learn more about our program and how we can help you.
Kristen, I know we're going to give the web address at the end, but can you just give that now as well?
Our web address is wehelpcaregivers.com. And we also have an 800 number. It's 1-800-388-0199 that people can call and ask any questions, learn more.
Thank you, Kristen.
I'll put all that in the chat box.
Perfect. Okay, Lindsay, what is the Alzheimer's Association of Northeastern New York, and what services do you provide to help people with Alzheimer's and their caregivers?
Great question. Thanks, Megan. So primarily we assist caregivers really just one-on-one as they're traveling this journey. We do know that Alzheimer's and dementia is a very isolating disease. So sitting down with a caregiver one-on-one for a care consultation where we just assist them in figuring out what long-term planning looks like, disease education, the stages, how to prepare for what's to come, talking about effective communication strategies and understanding dementia-related behaviors and what could be those triggers associated with those behaviors. Similar to Kristen, we also have support groups within the 17 counties that our chapter territory covers. And then we really just, after that basic assessment of what the needs are with the caregiver, we offer local resources to caregivers on what those needs may be. So as Megan said, when she introduced us all, I am a program manager for 3 counties, Warren, Washington, and Hamilton, but our chapter territory covers 17 counties. So there's 6 program managers that oversee the 17 counties. And we like to say that we're experts in the community that we serve. So we're able to offer advice and resources within the area that you and your loved one reside. We also have a 24/7 helpline. That's 1-800-272-3900. So if anybody is in crisis mode in the middle of the night, or they're just unsure how to redirect their loved one, they can really just reach out to the Alzheimer's Association at any point in time throughout the day or night to get just some feedback and help throughout any challenges that they may be having.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Heather, what can patients and caregivers expect at their first visit to Glens Falls Hospital Center of Excellence for Alzheimer's disease, and what questions should they ask?
So the Center of Excellence is an interdisciplinary program, and the main objective is to offer a thorough medical exam to find out first, is it even a neurodegenerative condition? There's some conditions that might look like dementia, but actually have a reversible etiology, and it's important that patients expect a very thorough workup. I think really in terms of questions that they could bring to the exam, really, rather than questions, a very solid history of a notation of changes, observed changes that they've witnessed in their loved one, and bringing an understanding of what their benchmark look like, what is normal for the patient, and what are the observed changes. That's really helpful in the diagnostic process. The other thing that helps our program and distinguishes it from a standalone neurology practice is comprised of many different specialists, one of which is a social worker. And there's evidence that social supports can really have a significant effect on outcomes for the patient and the family in terms of their journey. That's why at the Center of Excellence, we work very closely with our partners at the Caregiver Support Initiative and the Alzheimer's Association, because they can help the patient and the caregiver find resources that really aren't in a clinical practice, they're more in the community.
Thank you, Heather. And Kristen, we'll start with you on this next question. What treatment is available for Alzheimer's disease?
So I want to start out by saying that for treatments that are available, there are a lot of non-medication, pharmacological interventions that you can make, such as addressing behavior as a form of communication and the way that you're addressing your loved one, understanding some of those behaviors and why they might be doing things a certain way. Building a routine can be really helpful for someone living with dementia, waking up at the same time every day, eating breakfast, maybe going for a walk, and following that same routine every day. And lastly, just joining their world is like, if there's one thing I want people to understand when they're interacting with someone with dementia, just don't argue with them. If there's no point, really, you're both just going to end up being frustrated. So if they're saying something like, I want to go home, and maybe they are home, they're in their home that they've lived in for the past 20 years, but they're talking about their childhood home or somewhere else, instead of saying, what are you talking about? You lived here for 20 years. Instead of arguing with them, saying something like, I know you want to go home, but we're going to stay here tonight. We're going to have dinner soon. Why don't you tell me, what do you love about your home? What's your favorite place in your home? And have a conversation with them about that. They're going to be a lot more receptive to that than to hearing, that they're at home already. That's going to shut them down. Mm-hmm. So really having a strong understanding of the disease and how to engage with someone living with dementia and what the best practices are can really make a big difference, I think, in their care. And then I think, Heather, are you going to talk more about some of the medications and other treatments that are available?
I thank you, Kristen. There are treatments available to try to slow the progression of disease, and I'll actually probably defer more to Ruth because I think she plans to cover some of that in her dialogue. But I think to your point also is the non-pharmacologic interventions that can be taught, and I think that that's important to underscore that it's really education on communication that's important for really the family and the caregivers. And that's central to having a different experience with the disease. And I think Ruth does a very good job in her care of patients when she provides a diagnosis or works with families on really giving different strategies. And I know you and Lindsay do that as well.
Great. Thank you both. So Lindsay, how is the Alzheimer's Association of Northeastern New York fighting for a world without Alzheimer's disease and all other dementias? How can people help in that mission?
Yeah, so this is kind of a loaded question, and I could probably spend 4 hours talking about how people can help us on our mission. I will tell you that our vision at the Alzheimer's Association is a world without all dementia and Alzheimer's disease. We are one of the #1 funders for research. So if you were to donate $10, let's say, to one of our largest events that we do, let's say it's the Walk to End Alzheimer's. So out of the $10 that you donate to us, $7 of that stays locally within our chapter. $2 of that goes to research, and then $1 of that, I want to say, goes into that care and support piece. So we really focus on moving the dial. We want to make sure that we're involved with research as much as possible. We do have a really great program at the Alzheimer's Association called Trial Match. Trial Match is a clinical matching research study service. And I know Heather might touch on this later on, but we need healthy brains to join clinical trials just as much as we need those that have cognitive impairment. We really want to study the brain as much as possible for us to get to that vision of a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementias. We really have been trying to focus on volunteer-powered service delivery. So if anybody is ever interested in volunteering with us, we love our volunteers.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Heather, I'm going to ask you, what is the, excuse me, what if there isn't a Center of Excellence near a patient's home? What are the other options?
So our Center of Excellence is for the entire northeastern part of New York. So it covers Franklin, Clinton, Essex, Hamilton, Warren, and Washington County. We also get patients from Saratoga and Vermont. Distance doesn't deter care. We've been in existence since 2017, and what we've really tried to do is collaborate with primary care practices in the region to tee up as much information as we can in advance of the visit so that it's a very comprehensive history. It also helps to deduplicate information that might have already been obtained at the primary care level that is instrumental in the diagnostic process, because all of the pieces get incorporated into understanding what might be the root cause. And we are big champions of trying to get primary care practices to adopt the same process that we have. Because if we assess more people and we find it earlier, there's a greater chance that that patient can be enrolled in clinical trials. So that is not a conflicting priority. It's actually very complementary to have primary care engagement.
Great. That's good to know. Thank you, Heather.
Thank
A question did come in. I know all three of you ladies could answer this question, but Kristen, I'm going to throw it to you. What is the actual difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, and with respect to diagnosis of each?
That is a great question. It's probably one of my most frequently asked questions too. So it's confusing because people will use the word dementia and Alzheimer's interchangeably. Dementia is an umbrella term for many, many different types of memory impairment or other kind of neurological conditions. So Alzheimer's disease is one type of dementia. It's the most common type of dementia. That's why you hear it used the most. But there's other types too. There's vascular dementia, frontal temporal dementia, Lewy body dementia. Those are some of the other more common types. So I hope that answers the question that Alzheimer's disease is one type of dementia.
Perfect. Thank you. This next question, I think, is for both Lindsay and Kristen, but Lindsay, we'll start with you. What can you expect when you attend a caregiver support group?
Support groups are great for really just listening, offering some words of encouragement. You're able to be with others who are traveling your same journey. They are living in your shoes, going through similar challenges that you may be as well. So it's just a really wonderful opportunity to just offer some support yourself and listen to others to make you not feel as though you're on your own.
Kristen, what can you add to that?
I just want to echo that. I know we've already said it a couple times, but caregiving can be so isolating. So it's just an opportunity for you to connect with other people, to share what's working well for you, maybe what's challenging for you, and get some feedback from other people, share strategies or ideas, things that have worked for other people. And sometimes at some of our support groups too, we will have an opportunity for education. So in the past, pre-COVID, we had some speakers come sometimes based on what each support group was interested in. So if they were asking a lot of questions about powers of attorney and planning for the future, we'd invite an elder law attorney to come and speak to the group. Or if they had other questions, maybe about hospice, we might look for a speaker who could come and talk about that. Or I would just plan to come and speak and bring some more information to them. So it's a good place to get education too.
And if somebody wants to join a support group, Kristen, they just contact you directly?
Yes. They can contact us. There's also a current list on our website. And a lot of times, if for whatever reason, my support groups don't fit in their schedule, I always mention the Alzheimer's Association too. It's really nice that we cover the same area, so they have a lot of variety and options and what they can choose from, just based on what time is convenient for them.
Great, ladies, thank you. Heather, how can someone get their loved one with dementia to see a neurologist if they really do not want to?
So there's different strategies that families can use. The first one can be to propose the reality. The reality is that not everything's dementia, but it could look like dementia. So I think proposing that the purpose of the visit is to rule out a reversible cause, like thyroid disease is an example, that sometimes can help. Although often with the disease, a person lacks insight into their symptoms. And I think that that's what makes it unique from other diseases and maybe more challenging. So in those cases, sometimes it's helped to enlist the support of the primary care physician. If the symptoms are reported to the primary care physician and the family wishes to have a referral made and an assessment made to neurology, oftentimes the primary care practices or their nursing staff who can field the call can understand the situation and make the referral. And sometimes that's kind of the soft landing. The I think the patient trusts their primary care physician typically, and it's not coming directly from the family member. So that's one way to get the conversation quarterbacked to neurology. And then if it's a safety issue, it is important to remember that safety has to come above all else, right? And even if you have to go to the primary care physician, in the end, it's probably a difficult thing to do, but it's important for the well-being of the patient.
Great. Heather, we had another question come in. I'm going to keep this one with you. Would you recommend and or suggest any over-the-counter meds or even prescription meds to help with memory issues? And they say, of course, with doctor's approval, etc.
So I'm not a prescriber, and I like keeping swim lanes in terms of expertise. I'm an economist. So I have an MBA, not an MD. And I really believe that even within medicine, clinicians take each patient on an individual basis. And I think to speak to that, it really, and I know it sounds contrived, but I really do think each person is unique. And I think it depends on the patient. And I think the provider, after seeing the patient and understanding where they are, can make that decision and really look at that as the medical practice. You know, that's the art of medical practice, is finding what works for that individual. So that is so out of my swim lane. I do know that from my pharmaceutical experience that there's options out there for therapies, but I would defer to whomever your provider is.
Thank you. And we have another question here, Heather. Does the Glens Falls team offer clinics in the rural areas of the state? Franklin County is a long way from Glens Falls, especially with an elderly Alzheimer's patient.
You know what we have, and Ruth might be able to speak to this also, but we have patients that come from Franklin County. And what we do, we try to get the diagnostic algorithm that's the initial phase teed up in their own region. For instance, if a patient, part of the process is to rule out, is this a thyroid issue? Is this a vitamin issue? Those labs can be obtained in the patient's home area. And we can share information, with the referral. The other imaging is something that can be done in the patient's own area. So it's not as much of a schlep down. And we do like to get the disc so that our neurologist and our team can see the image itself and not rely on the report. So really, I do think it's important to speak to what the process is in terms of the administrative process when a patient comes or requests an appointment. Our neurologist looks at every single request for a patient appointment. And part of the reason we do that is there's very few neurologists in the region, and we want to make sure that it's a comprehensive appointment, and any information that could help inform that process, we get in advance of the person coming. The other advantage too is the use of telemedicine. In some cases, we have used that for the initial appointment when it becomes the best option for the family and caregiver.
Wonderful. Thank you, Heather. Kristen, it looks like you may have wanted to add something as well. Go ahead.
This is just going back to the previous question. I hope that's okay, about medication and over-the-counter and prescriptions. The only thing, I totally agree with what Heather said, and I am also not a prescriber. I do like to warn people about some fad supplements and things that I've seen on the internet, because just be careful and be mindful when you're seeing these like cures for Alzheimer's or dementia, and definitely talk to your doctor about them. A lot of them are not evidence-based. They're not really researched very well. So just be careful and mindful of that when you're looking online and doing some research yourself, and definitely talk to your doctor before you take anything over the counter, any kind of vitamin or supplement or anything that is advertised to help with memory loss.
Great advice. Thank you, Kristen. Lindsay, I'm going to throw this next question that we received to you. As someone progresses through dementia, would they need special housing? As in, should a home have no steps, locks on doors, etc.?
That's a good question. And, you know, going back to what Kristen and I do is that kind of that consultation of looking at what future long-term plans are. What does housing look like? How long are you going to be able to keep your loved one at home until you have care come in and help you? What does assisted living look like? What does maybe an adult day program? Maybe there is a home health aides that could come in and give the caregiver a break. You know, Kristen and the Caregiver Support Initiative offer that respite piece. So to answer the question, special housing is not always needed. We don't always look to assisted living or nursing home placement as our first conversation. We want to talk about the steps in between and how much can a caregiver really take themselves at home before looking into that long-term placement. If a caregiver does decide to keep their loved one home as long as possible, that is when we would discuss, you know, throw rugs and trip hazards and wandering, like Project Lifesaver. And we know 6 out of 10 with a diagnosis will wander. So getting Project Lifesaver on board. So we don't always kind of go that long-term placement route. We want to really kind of meet the caregiver and the person with a diagnosis where they're at and assist them with some planning in the immediate future and then long-term.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Our next question is for Kristen. What are the advantages of respite services, and when should a caregiver look into a short-term break like that?
I think caregivers a lot of times will wait to look into respite until they're in an emergency situation or they're totally burnt out and desperate for a break. And I really encourage people to look into respite early on in your caregiving journey, because it can help prevent you getting to that burnt out stage. The really nice thing about our program is that there's a lot of choice for the caregiver. So if you, let's say, apply for respite with our program, usually you would get a certain amount of hours based on your application, and you would be able to use that in your home with a respite provider that we have resumes for you to hire, and you are in charge of hiring that person, making sure they're going to be a good fit for you. We can also sign one of your friends or your family members up to be a respite provider. If you know someone, maybe a neighbor or someone who you think would be a good fit for you, we can get them signed on and do that paperwork. You can use it at an adult day program. You could use it for a short-term respite stay in a nursing home. I've had caregivers where they're getting surgery. They need to rest for 2 weeks after their surgery. And so their loved one goes into a nursing home just for a short amount of time. So they get that break, and really you want to do it before it gets to that point where you're burnt out or you're in an emergency, because it does take a little bit of time to fill out the paperwork and get everything approved and find a program or a respite provider that is going to work for you. Oh, Megan, I think you're muted.
I am, thank you. Okay, Kristen, thank you for that response. Lindsay, how can people get involved with their local chapter if they're interested?
We love our volunteers, and we really are trying to take our program managers, myself, giving our volunteers a little bit of the work that we program managers do. So we are training volunteers to become support group facilitators, where they facilitate support groups within our 17 counties. We train volunteers to be community educators so they can go out into the community and deliver education programs like the 10 warning signs or understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. We have volunteers that are community representatives so they can go to health fairs or farmers markets or senior picnics and table an event there for us. So we feel as though a volunteer doing that type of work would allow us program managers to get in front of primary care physicians to educate them on the importance of early detection and early diagnosis. So our volunteers kind of taking on that role of support groups, education, representing us at some bigger events. Our volunteers also could do one day out of the year and volunteer at one of our Walk to End Alzheimer's. We have 5 walks within our chapter territory. So we're always looking for volunteers to cheer our walkers on, to hand out t-shirts, to work the Promise Garden. So I will put a link in the chat for all of you if you're interested in connecting with us or becoming a volunteer.
Thank you, Lindsay. We had another question come in, and Kristen, I'm going to throw this back to you. It centers around respite care again. So let's go back to that. Is it ever possible to have respite care provided at home? Many nursing homes are not allowing respite care at this time due to COVID.
Yes, so a lot of our respite care can actually be done at home, especially if you're looking for a respite provider to come in for, a couple hours here or there. If you are looking into like a longer term, like going on vacation for a week or something like that, it's something you would have to talk to your care navigator about if you're enrolled in our program. But we'd love to be able to help people go on vacation too. Like I've had people go visit family for weddings or family reunions. So we're willing to work with you in order to get you the care that you need for your loved one. And I know COVID has made things a lot more challenging. So I think just talk to the care navigator and she'll talk to the respite coordinator and they can figure out a solution that's going to work for you based on your individual case.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Heather, what should caregivers know about hospice care and selecting a provider?
So I think with hospice care, I first like to address the distinction between palliative care and hospice care, because even among healthcare providers, sometimes it's confused. Palliative care can occur the moment of a diagnosis. The term refers to the relief of suffering. So in the case of someone with a neurocognitive condition, it's really relief of, with strategies on how do you live with this condition. So that's an ongoing process. And I think this model where you get a diagnosis and you collaborate with resources that can help support the process is really exemplary, and it's really palliative care in action. Hospice is specific to a point in time when it's anticipated that death is within 6 months. And for our region, because it's so vast, I think it's important really to consider what can the transition look like from palliative care to hospice. If you're able to keep providers and transition smoothly into just a different strategy, that's valuable. The other thing that's valuable is being able to access resources that are in your region. So we've got Hospice of the North Country, we have High Peaks Hospice, and we also have community hospice. So depending on where you are located, there's different resources.
Thank you, Heather. So I just want to remind everyone, we have about 10 minutes left. If you have questions, please submit those and type those into the chat box, and we will bring those to our panelists here. Kristen, I know you had talked a little earlier about Project Lifesaver, but we know it's such an important program. Maybe you can go into a little bit more detail about the importance of that and just exactly what it can do and how it can save folks.
Absolutely. Just given current events, I think it's so important to highlight this program. So we partner with the sheriff's departments to offer Project Lifesaver. And like I said before, it's a bracelet that your loved one will wear, although there are definitely times where people with dementia will cut them off. So we've had people get a little creative and they'll put them on someone's shoe if they have a favorite pair of shoes, or on a necklace, or they'll decorate it with the sticker to make it look like a watch or their favorite animal or something like that. So we can get a little creative with how we offer it. And one of the really nice things about it is that it is not GPS based. It's actually very old school technology, which means it's very reliable. If you live in the North Country, you know there are areas where your cell phone's not going to work. So it's very reliable. It uses radio frequency waves, and it has 100% success rate. As Lindsay said earlier, 6 out of 10 people that have a diagnosis will wander. And most of the time they're found within 1.5 miles of their home. But 1.5 miles is a big area, and there can be lots of dangerous areas. You know, if there's water or woods, it could be dangerous, especially we're getting into winter time and maybe they're not wearing a coat. They don't think to put one on before they leave the house, or even shoes. So it's really important that we're able to locate people quickly and keep them safe. Even if you're saying to yourself, you know, I don't think my loved one would wander, it gives you that little bit of peace of mind. You know, you hope that you never have to use it. You hope you never have to call the sheriff's department. But just in case, you have a plan in place in order to help locate your loved one in the event that they go missing.
Such an important
Megan,
program.
if I could just piggyback on that as well, and I'm sure Kristen can attest to this. Often when I meet with caregivers and I bring up wandering, their response is, oh, my loved one doesn't wander yet. Right? So it's that yet piece that, just like Kristen is saying, you never know, if it may never happen, but it's being prepared if it ever does.
Yes, and it doesn't always mean that they leave the home too. Like, I've had people get lost in the mall, or they're going, you know, they're going in town running errands, and they leave the loved one in the car for a little bit to run into the bank or the post office or whatever. They're coming right back out 5 minutes later, and you come back to the car and they're gone. So you got to have a backup plan in place just in case something were to happen. I see someone in the comments asking what the cost of Project Lifesaver is. So our program will cover it for free if you live in Warren, Washington, Hamilton, Clinton, Franklin, or Essex counties, and you are someone who's caregiving for someone with any kind of memory loss, not just Alzheimer's disease, and you don't even really need an official diagnosis. I believe if you don't qualify that, there are other programs you can look into, but I believe it's around $300 per device if you are if you don't qualify for some reason.
Thank you, ladies. What are some useful transportation services for people with dementia and caregivers? Kristen, do you want to start with that? Oh, you're on mute.
No, I'm muted. Yeah, I'm happy to answer this question. So I'm more familiar with Clinton and Franklin and Essex counties. So I know there is a service called We Care that will take both Medicaid and private pay options if you are needing transportation to a medical appointment. JCEO will also help with transportation for medical appointments, and they are only for people with Medicaid. And then I recently heard about this service called GoGo Grandparents, which I want to talk about. It's kind of like Uber or Lyft for older adults. And the Washington County the Washington County Disabilities and Aging Resource Center. They are actually partnering with them to offer rides, which I just saw in their newsletter last week. So I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to mention that as an option. I'm not sure how popular that is in our area yet, but I thought that was a really great idea, and I love that what's it called? The Aging and Disabilities Resource Center is offering that to individuals. Lindsay, I know you're a little more familiar with Warren, Washington, and Hamilton County. So do you want to talk about some of the transportation programs down there?
RSVP, which is Retired Senior Volunteer Program, they offer transportation within Warren and Washington County. And then the Conkling Center, which is located in Glens Falls, they provide transportation within, I'm pretty sure it's a 20-mile radius within downtown Glens Falls on a donation basis. You have to be over 55 years old. You have to be able to get in and out of the vehicle on your own. And it's just a donation. They'll take you to the hairdresser, the grocery store, a doctor's appointment. And the thing with the Conkling Center is they do book up quickly. So again, it's planning ahead and calling them to get on their schedule 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time.
Great. Thank you both. And Heather, we're going to end it with you. We have time for one more question. Where can you find current research in clinical trials?
So there's a number of really great websites where you can access information on trials. I think what's important to reiterate, I think it was touched upon earlier, there's the need to obtain more information about brain health in general. So not all people that are in clinical trials are people affected by neurocognitive conditions. You could have a well brain and enroll in a trial that's an observational trial. You can also have neurocognitive change and enroll in an observational trial. So there's a distinction. There's therapeutic trials and observational trials. So the therapeutic trials are for medications to see different endpoints, and interventional trials oftentimes are observational. So that's something important to know. In terms of websites, I think maybe we could put this in the chat later, but there's Trial Match, which is really valuable in terms of showing the clinical trials that the Alzheimer's Association, I think Lindsay had mentioned that they're a big sponsor for research. Trial Match is a great site. The National Institute of Health is a huge site for education as well as access to clinical trials. And then there's also a website called Center Watch, and they all can help you navigate knowing what types of trials are out there. And then it's important to emphasize, I think, New York State, from a policy standpoint, the Department of Health has done a fabulous job with the Alzheimer's disease program. There are 10 centers of excellence in New York State. Albany Med is one of them. They have patients enrolled in trials, as well as trials across the state. In the tri-state area, there's other academic centers such as Columbia, NYU, and Downstate, and they are enrolling patients in trials. So you can access that through the Department of Health website, or you can contact the Center of Excellence and we can navigate you to the academic centers that are also centers of excellence.
Wonderful. Lindsay,
I'm sorry,
yes.
and Ruth can touch upon this, but the one other area is postmortem with brain donations. And that's something we've done in our program, but that's something that's really instrumental for research as well, is getting tissue banked so that it can be studied.
Wonderful.
And that has to be done prior to death. All of that, getting the anatomical gift in place. Often caregivers want to do it afterwards, but there's a lot to brain donation.
There's a bit of an operational component to executing it in a timely manner. So that's the other benefit of getting an early diagnosis and a care plan, because all of those details and the wishes of the patient can be understood. Because Lindsay's right, there's some level of detail that has to be executed in a certain timeline for it to be able to be successful.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay, Heather, and Kristen. I think that was a great discussion. Thank you for all that wonderful information. And attendees, we appreciate all of your great questions as well. We're just going to take a quick 10-minute break here, and we'll be back after the intermission for our keynote presentation with Ruth Fish right at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
take this off too.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to jump into our keynote presentation with Ruth Fish. Okay, so Ruth Fish is our certified family nurse practitioner specializing in Alzheimer's. Ruth brings more than 30 years of experience in geriatric and internal medicine to Glens Falls Neurology, as well as the Center of Excellence for Alzheimer's Disease and Stroke Center at Glens Falls Hospital. Ruth earned her Bachelor of Science in Nursing at SUNY Plattsburgh and then achieved her master's in nursing with a double major in family nurse practice and community health. Ruth's unique skills, commitment to her work, and compassion for her patients are an asset to the community she serves. We are delighted to welcome Ruth and hear her expertise on the importance of getting an early Alzheimer's diagnosis with the diagnostic process, what the diagnostic process looks like, short and long-term planning, referrals for treatment, and keeping a positive outlook. Please remember again to type your questions in the chat box if you have any for Ruth, and we will reserve time at the end of the presentation to address those questions. So unlike the panel discussion, we will take all questions and address those at the very end of Ruth's presentation. So with that, Ruth, take it away.
Thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate being here. And even though it's a little more difficult, talking via the technology we have, I'm certainly grateful that we have that technology, especially during the last year and a half. We still have been able to carry on our work. So I have been working basically in geriatrics, initially primary care for many years, and I worked in a geriatric practice. And that's when I first began my love for geriatrics. and began my journey of learning about dementia. And I will tell you, the dementia care has changed drastically in the last 30, 35 years. I'm very passionate about it. And I'm actually on a mission to change the paradigm, change the culture, to be more brain healthy, and to start thinking about dementia and specifically Alzheimer's differently than we have. We have to treat ourselves and the caregivers and our families differently than we have. We have to raise the awareness, and we have to start doing things differently to be more healthy. We have to think of the disease a little bit differently than we have in the past. To begin with, I want to talk about why it's important to get diagnosed early. It's, as much as possible, it's vital to be diagnosed early. First of all, that will also help change the culture of how we think about dementia, and it will allow people to begin treatment early. The earlier we begin treatment for any disease, the better we can manage it. And Alzheimer's is a chronic disease, and we have to manage it. It's true we don't have a cure, but we do have ways to manage it and ways to mitigate some of the heartache and some of the symptoms related to the disease. Another reason to start diagnosing the disease earlier is so people can be enrolled in investigations and in trials, as we talked about earlier. We talked about some of the benefits of that, and that's really important. For both therapeutic and observational studies, it's really important to be diagnosed early and to investigate these things and see what families want to be involved in. That's important. Other reasons to diagnose early is so you can begin planning. That's really important. Initially, you want to think about financial planning, legal planning, may want to consult a elder law practice or an elder attorney. It's really important. And there is a large body of evidence that shows if we investigate things, if we know about things early and talk about them early, plan for them early, we are better equipped to deal with problems before they arise if we have considered it before it becomes a crisis. And the only time you can prevent a crisis or prevent something is before it happens. So it's really important to plan early on. And the other really important reason to diagnose early is so we can make lifestyle changes. We can make changes that we have to make to manage the disease. Someone asked a great question about the home environment, stairs, those kinds of things. People may want to consider where they live. They may want to consider downsizing. They may want to consider moving to a different location. Lots of people go away for the winter. They will need to think about that. We want to continue going away for the winter or not? So the earlier the diagnosis, the more people can think about those kinds of things and plan for the future and in a way that makes sense for that person and for that family. So it's a myriad of reasons to diagnose early. Then I wanted to talk about what the actual evaluation is, what the assessment consists of. We call it a workup in medicine. So when people come to our office, they're seen by a provider, maybe a neurologist, maybe a nurse practitioner. The first thing we do is get a complete history. That is quite detailed. It takes a fair amount of time, and we ask very specific questions. The first body of information we want is what brings you here today? What is the history of why you're here? I want to know specifically about memory. I want to know about working memory, day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour memory. I want to know about episodic memory. Can you remember what happened yesterday? Do you remember what you did last weekend? We call that episodic memory. I want to know about language. Is there a word retrieval problem? Is there a problem mixing up words? Can you name objects? Would you call a telephone orange juice? Those kinds of things. And some people with Alzheimer's have great language difficulties. So I ask a lot of language related questions. I want to know about procedural memory. Can the person still make coffee? Can the person still operate a lawnmower? Those are procedural things that have very specific steps. So I want to know about those kinds of things. I ask about social cognition, or some people call it psycho-emotional. What's your mood like? Do you have empathy? Do you not have empathy? Are you apathetic? All those kinds of questions. So there are lots of questions. I also ask about visual spatial things, which have big impact on people's daily life and driving. People with Alzheimer's may see fine. The actual apparatus of the eye works fine, but the connection between the eye and the visual cortex doesn't work right. Sometimes they misjudge distances. Sometimes they misjudge objects based on the contrast, the light and dark. So there could be visual spatial things. Those are all important things for us to know when we're evaluating. They also encourage the family and the person to think about, oh, yes, I do have trouble. I didn't realize that. I do have trouble with that. I didn't realize. Or the spouse or the care partner may say, yeah, I didn't realize, but she doesn't participate in conversations anymore. She doesn't, she really sits on the outskirts of the conversation. So it just raises awareness. It gives them things to think about in dealing with this. So that's sort of what's happening right now. Why did you come here? And I want to know about the past medical history. Past medical history is comprised of what chronic diseases the person has been diagnosed with. Specifically, I want to know about vascular related things. Does the person have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes? They all have huge impacts on the brain and on the vascular health of the brain. Is the diabetes well controlled, or is it not well controlled? Has the person ever had a stroke or a TIA or a seizure or head injuries? Did the person play football in high school or college or semi-professional football? They have obviously big impacts on the brain. So that's really important information to have. Then I want to know about social history. In social history, typically in medicine, we always think about cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs, illicit drugs. And there are some types of dementia are alcohol related. So we want to know how much the person has been drinking and for how long. The other thing that is important in the social history is the education. How much education has the person had? Not necessarily how many years in school, but that's important too. But other kinds of education and vocational education or classes. And I want to know about the environment. We've talked about this a couple of times. Do you have stairs? Do you live on a in a rural area with no houses around? What's the lighting like? Those kinds of things all have impact on the family and the person with dementia going forward. Mobility is really important. Getting around the house safely is really important. What's the heat like? What is the stove like? All those kinds of things have big safety implications. So we ask all those questions. I also want to know about the family history. Is there a family history of dementia? Not only does that, it inform us in terms of diagnosis, but it gives us an idea of how anxious the person might be. Oh, my mother had dementia, my aunt had dementia, my sister has dementia. That person might be much more anxious than a person who has no dementia in the family. So family history is really important to know. So all that information gathering actually takes a bit of time, and I think people don't realize how long that will take. But it's a lot of questions, and typically what I find is people like to tell stories. They want to tell about their father or their mother. They want to tell about what they could remember and what they couldn't remember. So And if you listen carefully, you get a lot of information in those stories. So that's good to know. And after I get all that information, I ask about physically how a person feels, any breathlessness, any chest pain, any GI problems, any musculoskeletal problems. Then I move on to a complete physical. And what I do is a complete physical, head to toe. You know, look in the eyes, check the ears, look in the throat, check the carotid arteries, the thyroid gland, the heart, the lungs, the belly. And certainly the focus is on the neurologic exam. Now, neurologic exam briefly has 6 components. The first component is what we call mental status. So that's when we check memory. Memory actually can be divided into components. There's immediate recall. Can you remember what I'm telling you for the next minute? And sometimes people can, sometimes people can't. Then there's recent memory. Can you remember what you did last night, last week, last weekend? That's more recent memory. And then there's remote memory. Can you remember, where you went to grade school? Can you remember your kindergarten teacher's name? Can you remember where you got married? Those kinds of things. People often have great remote memory, but maybe not so great immediate recall. So that just informs me. Now, mental status also has to do with judgment, reasoning, concentration, comprehension. Can you understand my words, what I'm saying to you? So it's not just, do you know who you are and where you are and what the date is? That, those are just a tiny little portion of the mental status. So we focus a lot on the mental status. The next component of the neurologic exam is the cranial nerves. Now we have 12 cranial nerves and we check them all during an exam. And the reason we check them all, obviously they're all in the brain, but they have very specific impact on the memory. For example, there are 3 cranial nerves that have to do with vision, and we check them all because vision is so important in Alzheimer's, and there is often a problem with visual spatial things. So we check the eyes, we check hearing. Hearing is one of the things that often is actually if there's no hearing loss, hearing very much helps people that have dementia. So I want to make sure they can hear. So I check all the cranial nerves, and that's done, quite quickly. Actually, it doesn't take very long. Then the next part of the neurologic exam is the motor portion. And by that, I mean, how strong are your arms, upper arms, wrists, hands, how strong are your legs? Can you walk? Can you get on and off the exam table? Can you get out of the chair? All those kinds of things. That's important. I remember many years ago when I was working in primary care, I go into the office and the patient's sitting on the exam table and everything looks fine. We go through the whole exam, why she's there. And then I said, okay, we're all set. Let's go out to the front desk. Well, she could not get off the exam table. She literally could not stand up, and she was completely uncoordinated, and she didn't really know enough to tell me that has a huge impact on her life. Turned out she had a very significant movement disorder that was just starting, but I didn't see her get on the exam table. She was already waiting for me when I walked in. So I always had the patients get on and off the table, actually walk down the hall, which has a big impact. That also helps us make the diagnosis. People that have Parkinson's dementia may walk differently than someone that has Alzheimer's dementia. So it gives information to check the motor portion. And I check the sensory portion of the neurologic exam. I make sure they can feel, or I evaluate to see if they can feel vibration. Can they feel light touch? Can they feel temperature? People often have decreased sensation in the feet, which impacts walking, which impacts safety, which impacts falls. So there's a whole set of reasons we check these things. So I check the sensory portion. Next, the 5th component of the neurologic exam is coordination. Well, coordination obviously has big a huge impact on safety. Can they do things with particularly their hands, but also their arms and other parts of their body in a coordinated fashion? And then last but not least, I check the reflexes. People have good reflexes or not, which all reflexes are very much important in mobility, which is a huge factor when we're talking about dementia. So that's the beginning of the assessment when people come to see us. Then there are lots of testing that we can order. And as Heather said earlier, people that come from far away, we try to get the testing done where they live. We can get lab work done. We check thyroid, we check vitamin B12. I always check a Lyme test because Lyme disease can have neurologic impacts. And I always check a blood count and chemistries just to make sure they're under control and there are no surprises. Then we talk about imaging. There are various imaging that we can do of the brain and the blood vessels. The MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, is probably the gold standard. Now, let me be really clear. Imaging does not diagnose dementia. An MRI, even though it's an excellent test, does not diagnose dementia. An MRI tells me if a person has a tumor, if a person has had a stroke or an injury to the brain, or if a person has something we call NPH, normal pressure hydrocephalus. That's a condition in which the ventricles in the brain have extra fluid. And people that have a lot of extra fluid in the brain can have bladder problems, walking problems, and memory problems. So we always check that. The reason that's important to check is because that is potentially reversible. If you find normal pressure hydrocephalus, we send people to a normal pressure hydrocephalus clinic. They get the fluid removed, and very often that improves the whole situation. So that's potentially a reversible cause of dementia that we can't test for unless we have imaging of the brain, and the MRI is the best test. So that's the reason to do an MRI. Sometimes we do CAT scans. Not everybody can have an MRI. Sometimes we do ultrasounds of the carotid arteries. If there's a blockage in the carotid artery, the person may be at risk for strokes. And we all know that strokes can affect brain functioning, and there is actually a type of dementia called vascular dementia. So we may check CAT scans and check the arteries. And then there is a test that we didn't actually talk about earlier, and that is a lumbar puncture, in which we take fluid from the spinal column and we actually check biomarkers specifically for Alzheimer's disease. And that's one of the best tests we have. Not everybody needs it. Not everybody wants it. We don't insist on any of these things. We really try to see what the patient wants, what stage the patient is at, and order the test that's appropriate. But there is a test in which we can check biomarkers, which are chemicals basically in these cerebral spinal fluid for Alzheimer's disease. There's also another imaging test called a PET scan that sometimes we order, and that helps us differentiate different kinds of dementia. So there's lots of testing. Another test that we often order is called neuropsychological testing, and I think Heather touched upon that. Neuropsychological testing is testing with it's paper and pencil. You see a neuropsychologist, and that test is actually very important because it tells us which part of the brain works really, really well, which part of the brain doesn't. For example, my language part of my brain is not so good. Never has been. I've never been able to spell well. My vocabulary is not nearly as good as my husband's, for example. But my executive function, prefrontal cortex, is pretty good. My husband's executive function is not good. He needs me to remind him. However, his language is fabulous. He knows the meaning of any word I could ask him. He can spell any word. So the neuropsych testing helps us figure out what part of the brain works well, what part of the brain doesn't work, and that informs our treatment later on. So it's very helpful. So that we put all that information together, the history, the physical, the labs, the imaging, maybe the biomarkers, maybe the neuropsychological testing. We put all that information together and we come up with what we think is a pretty good assessment of what is going on in the brain. And it's from that assessment that we try to develop our plan. So that's sort of the first part. So after we have all the information, now we talk about the management. And that's really the nuts and bolts of how we treat this. First of all, we have to remember Alzheimer's is a neurodegenerative disease. It's not just a memory problem. We really sort of need to change how we think about it. It's not just memory. People can have a pretty preserved memory, but still have judgment and reasoning issues or language issues or primarily language issues. Not so much memory. So you wouldn't notice the memory, but you notice the language isn't so good. She's not very fluent. She can't think of the right words. And I have a patient whose memory is actually pretty good, but if I ask her a question, she can't answer. If I just talk to her like a friend, she can talk to me. She can't read. I have specific things I want her to do every day, but she can't read. So I can't give her notes, but I can give her pictures. So we've sort of made a picture list for her. So she knows what she's got to do in the morning. She knows what she's got to do in the afternoon. So that's her primary problems are language. So that's why the diagnosis and the testing and the assessments are so important. Anyway, so let's move on to management. Now, I'm going to talk about what I call brain healthy activities, and those are the words I use, and I'm going to talk about them as they relate to a person with dementia, but I'm here to tell you they're important for all of us. These are brain healthy things we all should be doing that are important for all of us. We all know that we're all supposed to be doing heart healthy things, right? We all know about healthy diet. We all know about exercise. We all know about controlling our blood pressure. Well, we have to start thinking about brain healthy things as well. One of the first brain healthy things I talk about is socialization. Human beings are social creatures. We're meant to be social, and people that are not social are at higher risk for problems with their brains. We all also know after the last year and a half or 2 years that this pandemic has really had an impact on all of us. We're less social, especially last year before the vaccine came out. We weren't getting together with our friends, with our families. Some families didn't see each other for over a year. Our patients didn't see each other. Those in assisted living had to stay in their rooms. They had to eat their meals by themselves. That all had a negative impact on all of us, with and without Alzheimer's disease. So socialization is so important, and that can come in lots of varieties. It doesn't have to be just getting together with someone. During the pandemic, I would encourage phone conversations, meetings like this. I know the Alzheimer's Association had lots of Zoom meetings. Some of our patients would do arts and crafts via Zoom, which was great. You got to see someone else. You got to see the facial expressions. You got to hear them. That was really important. So socialization is really important. A vital person, a vital caregiver, a vital spouse gives vitality. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for vitality in our patients. That's what improves the quality of their life and helps to mitigate the symptoms of this disease. So socialization is really important. It can be car rides. It can be going with your spouse to go to the bank, go to the grocery store. In the grocery store, you see other people. You see life around you. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for you to see life. That's really, really important. Another way to get socialization is through therapies. I often refer people to speech, PT or OT. They go there, they see people, they see someone different, and they engage in other activities. So that's another form of socialization. So there, we're only limited by our imagination. Socialization is really important. That's really brain healthy. Another really important part of being healthy to your brain is to be physically active. Exercise, we all know, promotes what we call neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a concept that we've only discovered in the last probably decade. When I was in school, we didn't even know about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a process by which the brain, the neural connections in the brain, can actually grow. We used to think that wasn't possible, but it is possible. And exercise can actually improve cognitive function and motor function. So exercise is important. Now, you don't have to go to a gym. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to have a trainer. All you got to do is walk. Walking is important. But any kind of exercise, here in Glens Falls, going to the wellness center is good. Going to physical therapy is good. Doing your physical therapy exercises is good. It's all important. Now, talking about exercise, it's important also during exercise or thinking about exercise to be safe. I don't really want you walking out on Route 9 or Route 4 or any of those, busy highways that have no shoulders. That's not good. I don't want my patients walking out in bad weather, especially in the winter or even in the fall when the leaves are wet. I do not want any accidents to occur because people are trying to get their exercise. That would be counterproductive. But exercise is important. And then the third big component of being of brain health is cognitive function. I like people to be cognitively active. Now, cognitively active is different for all of us. Reading, looking at pictures, watching some television, that's all cognitive activity. Reading the newspaper and talking particularly about what you read in the newspaper is cognitive activity. Doing puzzles, jigsaw puzzles helps visual spatial issues. Crossword puzzles helps language issues. That's all cognitive exercise. Listening to music. Music seems to reach people's brains in a different way than talking and other things. So listening to music, especially music that people grew up with, the music of the 50s, maybe even the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. Listening to that music it stimulates the brain. Recently, there has been some evidence that shows that listening to music with words helps the language part of the brain. And it can, is especially important for people that have language issues as part of their disease. So listening to music with words is important, or singing along would be important. People often remember the music, the hymns they sang in church when they were little. I've sat with people in the nursing home, older women that will sing the hymns that they sang when they were, 5 years old and 10 years old. They can still remember the words. They probably can't carry on a conversation, but they can sing those hymns. That's great. That's life. That's using your brain. So I love to see those kinds of things. And then playing games. Playing games is social. Playing cards is social. People that have vision problems, you can get really large cards and play. The Association of the Blind has large cards or has access to them. And playing match games or memory games, if you're more sophisticated, that's all cognitive exercise. So that's all really important. And those things are important to do every single day. It's, not just once in a while, but some form of those every single day are important. Doing things around the house, if you can still use the lawnmower safely, then mowing the lawn is important. Cooking is important, all those kinds of things. So those are what I call brain healthy things. We all have to be doing those. We all have to be using our brains. We all have to be exercising, and we all have to be social. It's good for all of us. Another component of management of this disease is having a healthy diet. We all talk about the Mediterranean diet these days. Mediterranean diet's high in vegetables, legumes, beans, and it's lower in saturated fats and meats and dairy. So I always, put a plug in for a healthy diet, particularly in the later stages of the disease when people are losing weight. I talk a lot about diet and nutrition. It's really important. And fluids. Traditionally, older people, men and women, don't drink enough fluids. And when you don't drink enough fluid and you're sedentary and you happen to be in your 80s, it's easy to get a urinary tract infection. And a urinary tract infection can be deadly when you already have a neurocognitive disease or neurodegenerative disease. So it's really important to drink plenty of fluids. That's just really important. And then another aspect of being healthy and managing this disease, really important for patients and caregivers, is sleep. I have lots of patients that struggle with sleep, are awake all night, wandering around the house all night. And that's terrible for them because our brains really do need sleep to be rejuvenated for the next day. But also the caregivers need sleep. If your spouse is up all night, particularly up and down stairs, but just up all night or calling out in their sleep or having dreams and not knowing where they are, who can sustain that more than a couple of nights? Nobody can. So we spend a lot of time talking about sleep. And that's one of the questions that I get a lot, or one of the problems that needs to be solved. So we ask about sleep apnea, we ask about restless sleep, we ask about what we call REM sleep disorder. That is a sleep disorder that is prevalent in certain kinds of dementia. And those people thrash about, fall out of bed, talk in their sleep, sometimes hit their spouses. So we ask about that, and that has specific treatment. I also always talk about sleep hygiene. You can't have 2 cups of coffee at 8 o'clock and expect to be in bed by 10 asleep. So we talk about sleep hygiene. We talk about routines for sleep. You can't go to bed at 8 o'clock one night, midnight the next, and want to go to bed at 9 o'clock the next night. So having a sleep routine and appropriate sleep hygiene is good. We always talk about that. But it's really important to treat as much as we can sleep disturbance. Really important for the caregivers. You just ask any of those caregivers and they'll tell you, really important. So those are some things, some ways that we try to manage the disease. As a chronic disease, it's important to be managed. Another thing I want to spend a moment or two talking about is medications. Now, as part of the initial history, I have checked people's medications, and hopefully I've gotten records from their PCP about what medications they've been on. As Heather said, we try to get all the information possible before they come to us, and sometimes they already come with an MRI, they already come with neuropsych testing, they already come with those things, and then we try to manage the disease. But medications are really, really important. There's a whole list that we call the Beers list, and it's a list of scores of medications that are not recommended in elderly, and they're specifically not recommended in people that have memory problems or neurocognitive, neurodegenerative disorders. And because they can cause confusion, they can cause lethargy, they can cause sedation, and they can cause a lot of other problems, urinary retention. I had a patient once that took Benadryl for sleep. That's an anticholinergic medication, not recommended. And someone told him to take Benadryl because he wasn't sleeping. Benadryl causes urinary retention in some cases. He was 80, he developed a urinary, he didn't know he couldn't pee because he just wasn't aware. By the time he realized it, he had a urinary tract infection. He was sent to the hospital. He had to be catheterized. In the hospital, he got delirious, very confused, and he died in the hospital. So he died from a urinary tract infection. He did not die from Alzheimer's disease specifically, but he took Benadryl for sleep, and it doesn't always cause urinary retention, but in a good number of people, it is one of the things it does cause. So there's a whole list of medications, over the counter and prescription medications, that are not good when you have a neurodegenerative disease. Anticholinergics are, one of the big offenders. And Benadryl, diphenhydramine, Antivert, Dramamine, they're all anticholinergic, and they're over the counter, and we use them a lot. People buy them a lot. They're not recommended. Narcotics are not recommended. Other kind of non-narcotic pain medications are not recommended. Sleeping pills, absolutely not recommended. Lots of people take Zolpidem, which is Ambien. Well, Ambien can cause people to sleepwalk and not be aware of it. I had a patient once that got up in the middle of it, and she was, I think, 82 or 84, got up in the middle of the night. She lived alone. She was not demented, but she was elderly. She got up in the middle of the night after taking her Ambien. She walked across the street to the bar in her nightgown, and her son's friends brought her home. She had taken an Ambien, and she had no recollection of that the next morning, zero. So sleeping pills are not recommended. Now, having said that, I just got through telling you sleep was really important, but there are things we can do for sleep, assuming sleep hygiene modalities are in place. There are certain medications that can help sleep, and certain medications are better than others. So sometimes we have to use these medications I'm telling you not to use, because we have to manage the disease. I certainly realize that, and that's the reality. But there's some things that are better than others. So try not to take over-the-counter things. Try to check with somebody about what would be best for sleep. Muscle relaxers, terrible for people with neurocognitive disorders, neurodegenerative. Certain types of antidepressants, the old antidepressants, amitriptyline, nortriptyline, people use those for neuropathy, and they're anticholinergic. They're not recommended. Lots of people take gabapentin for neuropathy in their feet. Gabapentin is not recommended. Lyrica is not recommended. That's pregabalin. I had a patient once that came in because she thought she had a memory problem and she thought she was going crazy. She was hallucinating from gabapentin. She really was. She said she thought, fuzz and pus were coming out of her head. She said, I know it's not really, but I think it is. It was gabapentin. Stopped that. But then, of course, I was faced with, she's got terrible neuropathy. What are we going to use? But anyway, the hallucinations went away. So medications can be terrible. We use a lot of compazine and Phenergan for nausea and vomiting. They're antispasmodics, absolutely not recommended. So we try other kinds of things. So the antipsychotics, which we do use occasionally, are totally not recommended. They can increase mortality. But the reality is sometimes we use them. Well, there are some that are better than others. So medications just are a huge problem that has to be dealt with. I had a patient once that had diabetes, which is really important to control. He was on metformin, which is a great diabetic medication. I've used it, for years, but in some people it causes diarrhea. So he was on, his diabetes was well controlled. He had loose stools at home, but he had significant dementia. He went with his wife to Grandparents' Day at a local school, and he was incontinent of liquid stool in the school. So, that's heartbreaking. That's just heartbreaking. So we had to figure out how to control his diet. I had to work with his PCP. I don't change those medications, but I would just call his PCP and say, this is what happened. What can we do? So there's just a whole raft of medication issues that just have to be dealt with. And, when you know that someone has a neurodegenerative disorder and they have other things, we have to figure out a better solution, which we usually can do, but it's not always easy. Other really important things are to avoid illness. I just told you about a man who had a UTI, went in the hospital and got delirious. If you have a neurodegenerative disease and you change the environment and you go to an emergency room and then you're admitted to a hospital, almost for sure you're going to have some increased confusion and sometimes some downright delirium. We've all seen that. You all have seen that probably as caregivers. So we really try hard to avoid hospitalizations and ER trips, particularly in the day of COVID for sure. So I tell people to stay in close touch with your PCP. You think there are symptoms starting, you call your PCP, let's like nip this in the bud. I tell people to avoid exposure. If your grandkids are sick, I don't want them visiting. If you're not feeling well, I don't want you in the grocery store. Try to, minimize exposure. Try to drink plenty, eat healthy, get enough sleep, avoid illness, really important. Try to keep up on immunizations. Get your pneumonia shots, get your flu shots. That can help avoid illness, all really important. The other thing that I tell patients, not everybody does, there's some evidence from this, but most of my evidence is anecdotal. If you can avoid general anesthesia and you have a neurodegenerative disease, you should avoid general anesthesia. Now, if you absolutely need surgery and it has to be general, then you have to. But a lot of joint surgery and joint replacement can be done with spinal anesthesia. And the reason I say that, I can, off the top of my head, I can think of 6 or 8 patients that have come in and said, I noticed after I had my knees replaced that my memory is not as good. And the spouse will say, I noticed that she started having some trouble with dates and time after general anesthesia. Not everybody agrees with that. That's anecdotal, and I'll be happy to, admit that. There's not a good body of evidence, but I think anecdotal reports are important too. So I just want to pass that along. And nobody wants to have surgery that doesn't need it anyway. So, and changing the environment can be tough on people with these diseases. So we like to be aware of that. Other really important things are controlling chronic diseases. Blood pressure, systolic, the top number should be under 130. That decreases the risk of stroke. Bad cholesterol should be under 70. That decreases the risk of stroke. Diabetes should be controlled. Now, having said this, I don't like things, it's a delicate balance. I don't like things too controlled. I don't like the blood sugar so controlled that it could be too low, because that's terrible for the brain. I don't like the blood pressure so controlled that it's too low, because that can cause people to fall. So it's a real delicate balance. It's not, black and white. It's not easy. Everybody's a little different. So it's important to kind of be aware of those kinds of things.
Ruth, I just want to jump in quickly and just let you know, we're at 2:45. That leaves us 15 minutes. And I just want to remind our viewers and listeners, if you have questions, please type those into the chat box. We do have a couple questions that have come in, but I can wait until
I'll finish up in 5 minutes for sure.
Oh, no, keep going. I just wanted to give you a little time check. You're doing
I appreciate it. I believe you. I'll
job.
pass the time for sure. Thank you, though. I appreciate that. We've touched upon safety in a couple of ways, and I do really want to talk about safety. I always talk about safety every visit. Safety first, last, and always. Safety, are there guns in the house? I've had to actually send police to remove a loaded gun from underneath the pillow of a demented patient. So guns, stove, driving is a safety issue. We haven't even touched upon that. Operating other machinery are safety issues, and wandering. I have lots of examples of us using with our patients Project Lifesaver. I always talk about it. And you're right. People will say to me, oh, he doesn't wander. The other thing I have, oh, he'll never wear that. He won't keep that on. Well, I'm telling you, there are ways to figure it out. So the only time you can prevent a problem is before it happens. So I am majorly into prevention. I don't want to solve the problem after it occurs. I want to prevent it. So Project Lifesaver, we talk about it all the time. Many of my patients use it, and it has saved the day in several cases for sure. So Project Lifesaver, really, really important. Okay, so we've talked a lot about a lot of things. The last thing I want to talk about, which is really important, is anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression absolutely affect the brain, affect the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and there's a lot of thought and a lot of work being done these days to see what the effects of chronic anxiety, chronic stress are on the brain. So when I was in primary care, I would see younger people that did not have any neurocognitive disorders yet. I would always say, you have to protect your brain by taking care of the anxiety. Now, it's really important to develop non-pharmacologic treatment of anxiety. I talk about that all the time. Caregivers are really important in using non-pharmacologic treatment, non-pharmacologic modalities to relieve stress, to not cause stress. Somebody earlier said, don't argue. Don't argue with someone that has a neurodegenerative disease. You won't win. And you won't get what you want. You won't be able to do anything. Don't argue and don't try to reason. So many of spouses of my patients will say, well, I've told her 3 times. I told her it's not a good idea to do that because it will cause another problem. They don't get it. They don't get it. So I try to remind people not to reason, not to argue, and not to cause problems. I think maybe Kristen, or maybe you, Lindsay, said, if the patient says, "Oh, I want to go home. I want to go home." Sometimes I'll say, put them in the car, take them for a ride, come back to your house and say, "Here we are." And guess what? That will change the seat enough. So they'll say, "Oh, thank God I'm home." That's enough. So I call that therapeutic fibbing. So we do a lot of therapeutic fibbing. That's just really important. So that's all, it's all really important. Having a routine is really important. Okay, so that's some of the, a brief history of what we do here on the first visit. Now, let's just talk briefly about planning for the future. After people get a sort of a confirmed diagnosis, they need time to cope with it. But hopefully we can set the stage and change the culture. It's a chronic disease. People live with heart failure. You can live with brain failure too. You live years and years with heart failure. You can live years with brain failure. Let's change the paradigm. Let's change how we think about it. We just have to teach people how to do that and how to get it in clinical trials so we can learn more about it, so we can cure it in our lifetime. That's my goal. I'm interested in curing this dang disease, but it's a failure of the brain. It's chronic, it's progressive, and right now we have no cure. So people need to develop a plan to deal with it. People need to develop a brain healthy lifestyle. They need to, minimize medications. They need to maximize sleep. They need to minimize anxiety and depression. They need to gather their resources, both in the community, the resources all of you present, and the resources of family and friends. They need to get legal and financial things under control. They need to talk about a healthcare proxy. They need to talk about, end of life kinds of things. And they need to talk about care. They want to stay in their own home. Do they want to be in assisted living? Do they want to be in a day program? Do they want a combination? Do they want home health aid, physical therapy? And it will change as the disease changes. And that's what we're here for. We're here to help you. And you all are there as experts to help caregivers figure this out, because it changes as the disease changes. Do you want a combination of care? Do you want some family support, some privately hired, some community support? Every situation is different, and what our social worker does, what you all do, is help families figure this out. It is manageable. We can figure it out. It's not always easy. It's not always ideal, but we can figure it out and we can change the paradigm and change the culture. So there are many other things we could talk about, but that is in a nutshell what we do here and what we feel passionate about. And thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Ruth, thank you so much. You gave us some really valuable tips and information. I'm sure all of our listeners and viewers will take a lot away from this discussion. We do have a couple questions. This came in earlier, and maybe Kristen or Lindsay can jump in too, but can you address if someone does not have an early care plan and it's been years now, what advice would you give to that person?
So I'm assuming that the question being maybe their loved one is in the middle stage of the disease with no care plan and it's been a couple of years. That's what I'm assuming.
That's what it sounds like. Mhm.
It is never too late to start planning, right? So as Ruth said, I think that Heather and Kristen maybe touched on it. It's so much easier to have a plan in place than to make decisions in crisis mode. So starting that planning process now, whomever asked the question, please feel free to reach out to myself or Kristen to offer, we're able to offer you some advice on that long-term planning, just knowing where you're at right now with legal plans, power of attorney in place, healthcare proxy, like Ruth said. We want, your loved one or the person that has a diagnosis to be involved as much as possible in the planning process, which is why we stress so much having it done early on to have their input as well. But if it's kind of past that point, we're able to assist you in looking at what the future looks like. How much will the caregiver be able to handle by themselves as the disease progresses?
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. And then Ruth, we have another question here for you. Where can you find a list of medications that should not be used? You had mentioned some earlier. Do you have?
You can find it online, or your healthcare provider could pull it up for you. It's called the Beers List, BEERS, Beers List. But I want to warn you that it's full of medications that we all use all the time. But there's some things that are worse than others. But it's important to talk about those kinds of things with your healthcare provider. But there is a list called the Beers List, and it's basically a list of medications that people that are older, geriatrics, should not be using. It's not just for people with neurodegenerative disease. Beers List.
Great. Thank you. That's helpful. And then we have another question here for you, Ruth. Are medications like Namenda helpful during the later stages of Alzheimer's?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. I did not talk about what medications there are available. There are some medications. Typically, there are cholinesterase inhibitors. There are a few on the market, and they are designed, and they showed some evidence in slowing the progression of the disease. And I have enough patients and been doing this long enough to know that sometimes medications like Namenda, people will say, boy, he's a lot better on Namenda. Or other people will say, I didn't see any difference on Namenda. The ones that we typically use often here are Aricept, which is also donepezil. People know it by both names. And rivastigmine, which is Exelon. And they each have a very similar side effects, but slightly different. And they each have slightly different results when we use them. What's important whenever you're going to take, and there are a couple others, Namenda being one of them, or memantine. What's important to figure out is you want to weigh the likely benefit with the risk. For example, I typically don't put my 90-year-old patients on a cholinesterase inhibitor because they have side effects that could be devastating to a 90-year-old, and I'm not going to get that much reward from them. That doesn't mean that I never would do it, but I would think long and hard, and I would involve the family and or the the person with the disease in the process of deciding. But yeah, there are some medications that do help, and there are some other medications that can help as well. Anxiety and depression, if non-pharmacologic modalities do not resolve anxiety, then we do use medication that typically is safe in this population, but it's really important to control anxiety, and we do use medications for sure. But Aricept, rivastigmine, memantine, those are medications we absolutely use all the time.
Great.
Thanks.
And with yes. And with just 3 minutes left, I just want to remind folks to please type your questions into the chat box. Ruth, I'm curious, is Alzheimer's more prevalent in women than men or vice versa?
Yes, it is.
And
do we know why? Not exactly.
No.
There's lots of speculation, but we don't know why, truly. Unless you all know something I don't, and feel free to jump in. I know it's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And then we have another question here too, Ruth. Is it hereditary?
Oh, that's a good question. It tends to run in families, sort of. And there are some genetic markers that if you have a genetic marker from your father and the same genetic marker from your mother, your risk is much higher. It does not mean you're absolutely going to get the disease, but the risk is much higher. But, you know, I mean, I could have those genetic markers. Both my parents died young before they would have developed it. I don't know if I have those genetic markers. I suspect not. I hope not, but I don't know if I have them. So I'm going to try to keep my brain as healthy as I can.
Great.
Does that answer the question, Megan?
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you. And right now we do not see any other questions coming in. We'll give it a couple more minutes. I do think you gave some really incredible tips. I know a lot of which I'll take away with me. I particularly liked your healthy lifestyle tips about exercise, how important that is. Listening to music, I found that very interesting, particularly music with words and how that helps stimulate the brain. Staying social, a healthy diet, and keeping hydrated, and sleep. I think those are 5 really great tips for our listeners today to walk away with. We appreciate all of this valuable information that all of our panelists and our speaker gave us today. So I just want to thank again, Ruth, Lindsay, Heather, and Kristen. I think you ladies did a phenomenal job, and you've given us some really great information to think about. Oh, we have one more question. Let me just see. Okay. Yes. As someone whose mother was just recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 52, I just want to say thank you for all the help you all provide. I can tell we will have a lot of support going forward. That's really nice to hear.
52, boy, that's young.
And again, piggybacking off of what Ruth has said this whole time, getting away from that stigma and changing the outlook that everybody has on Alzheimer's and dementia. 52 years old. This is not just an older person's disease. Mm-hmm. You know, there are 400,000 Americans living with younger onset, which is a diagnosis before the age of 65. So, you know, we need to change that stigma and moving forward. And I don't know who had wrote that in, but you are not alone on this journey, and you have plenty of support. Utilize us. We're free to utilize as much as you want or need. As we've said, this is an isolating disease, and we don't want you to feel like you're alone in this.
Absolutely.
100%.
And there are a lot of other forms of dementia, not Alzheimer's disease, like frontal temporal dementia tends to affect younger people in their 40s and 50s, which I think, again, reducing that stigma, it can happen to younger people too, will really help people talk to their doctors about any changes that they're experiencing.
Right, absolutely, 100%.
Well, ladies, thank you so much again. That concludes our conference. I just want to thank you all for attending and for joining us virtually today and for submitting such great questions. This was a really great conversation, and we need to have more of them. This presentation has been recorded and will be posted to the Caregiver Support Initiative website in the next week or so. So check back. If you have any additional questions or you would like to get in touch with the Caregiver Support Initiative, please contact this amazing team at 1-800-388-0199 or visit their website at wehelpcaregivers.com. They offer services such as support groups, memory cafes, in-person and online training, and respite coordination, as we mentioned today. Please do not hesitate to reach out. They are here to help you. Also, we would love for you all to join us again on December 15th for another virtual caregiving conference on how to be a caregiver without losing yourself in the process. So check Facebook, our Facebook page in the coming weeks, and watch your mailbox for a postcard, because we also mailed out a little postcard with more information. We hope to see you again on December 15th, and thank you all for coming today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.